Chris Doumitt sat in his chair, looking older than usual, and not because of age. His eyes carried a weight that came from holding on to a truth for many years, a truth he had never planned to speak, a truth he had once promised he would never reveal. He looked at the small SD card in his hand, the same SD card he took from a broken camera years ago, the same SD card that held the footage Parker Schnabel wanted erased forever. Chris looked down at it, rubbed his thumb across the tiny plastic surface, and finally said, "It's time people know." He didn't speak loudly. He didn't speak boldly. He spoke like a man who had been waiting for a moment he hoped would never come. His voice was steady, but there was something inside it that you could feel, something uneasy, something real. This was not a story he enjoyed telling. This was a story that had lived inside him like a heavy stone. He began by explaining that the footage on the card was not normal. It wasn't the kind of thing you cut from a show because of boring content or time limits. This was something else, something bigger, something that changed everything he thought he knew about the claim they worked on and the land beneath their boots. For years, everyone believed the wildest moments on that ground made it to TV, but according to Chris, the most shocking moments never aired. They weren't even reviewed. They were hidden, buried just like the strange thing they found on that ridge. Chris remembered the night the camera was destroyed. It happened during the accident when the excavator tore through the power line on the far bench. Everyone had been scrambling, shouting orders, trying to keep the situation under control. In the chaos, a field camera was dropped and crushed. Parker called it totaled, a complete loss. He told the crew to toss it at the scrap pile. Everyone assumed nothing inside could be saved. But Chris, curious by nature, walked over to the broken camera when no one was looking. The body was bent, the lens was cracked, but the SD card slot caught his eye. He slid the card out, brushed off the dirt, and slipped it into his pocket without a word. He didn't know why he did it. He told himself it was habit. Miners save what they can. But deep down, Chris admitted he felt something else in that moment. A strange pull, like the card didn't want to be thrown away. For 2 years, Chris kept the card hidden. He watched the files privately, unsure if he should tell anyone what he saw, unsure if the network would let him speak, unsure if even he could understand what Parker was dealing with. Every time he thought about showing someone, the memory of Parker's face that night flashed in his mind. The fear, the urgency, the anger. Parker was not himself that night. He was someone else, someone Chris didn't recognize. Chris described the night the camera captured the first strange clip. It wasn't mining footage. It wasn't gold. It wasn't anything you would expect on a quiet claim after midnight. The camera had been left on standby near the tailings, recording in low light. Parker was alone, pacing back and forth, talking under his breath. At first, Chris believed Parker was simply stressed. They had been behind schedule, and Parker often walked the site late at night. But then Parker raised his voice. He wasn't talking to himself. He was arguing with someone who was not in the frame. A second voice responded, a voice that didn't belong to any crew member, a voice no one recognized. The tone was sharp, controlled, and cold. Parker's words were even sharper. "You weren't supposed to be here," he said. "We didn't agree on this." His breathing was heavy, almost shaking. He kept pointing at something just out of view, something or someone standing close enough to speak, but not close enough for the camera to capture. Then, suddenly, Parker froze. He turned his head and stared straight into the camera lens like he had just realized it was recording. He snapped off his headlamp, plunging the entire area into darkness. The only light left was the faint glow from idle machines in the background. In the darkness, Parker's voice cut through like a knife. "Shut it all down, now." Moments later, every generator, every tower light, every piece of equipment shut off at once. The site fell silent and black. But Chris's camera kept rolling in the dark. The clip ended with a loud thump near the mic. The file cut off at that exact moment. Chris paused when he described this part. He looked down, his hands tightening together. He said that moment was when he knew something was very wrong. The Parker he saw that night was not the Parker he worked with. This was someone who wasn't scared of losing gold. He looked scared of something else, something deeper. But that wasn't the end. The next file on the card played automatically when Chris reviewed it. It was the next morning, showing a rock shelf on the ridge that had never been filmed before. Chris explained that Parker had banned filming in that area, even before anyone knew why. The rock formation didn't look natural. It was too smooth, too aligned, almost like it had been shaped by tools, not nature. Parker crouched beside it in the footage, brushing away dirt with shaking hands. He whispered, "This isn't on any map. Who covered this?" His voice didn't sound like a man excited about a discovery. It sounded like a man who wished he hadn't uncovered something. He marked a symbol on the rock, a shape no crew member had seen before, a shape that later appeared in Parker's notebooks, drawn over and over again. Chris said the moment that changed everything came when Parker brought out the handheld detector. He turned it on and the signal went wild, not like gold, not like metal fragments. The detector returned a perfect block reading, a uniform density, a solid object, something engineered, something buried deep under the ridge. The reading was too strange to ignore, but instead of digging it up, Parker covered it, quickly, nervously, like he wanted to hide it before anyone else noticed. He kept muttering, "We're not showing this." His voice wasn't excited, it was frightened. The next day, Parker called an emergency meeting. He brought strange legal documents none of them had ever seen. Not TV contracts, not NDAs. These papers talked about restricted subsurface assets and geospatial anomalies, words miners had no reason to hear. Parker made the entire crew sign them with no discussion, no jokes, no questions. After that, everything changed. The atmosphere on the claim felt heavier, almost like the ground itself was watching them. Machines near the ridge began acting strange. Lights flickered, engines revved with no one inside. At first, everyone thought it was electrical trouble, but then they found the cut hydraulic line. It wasn't worn down, it wasn't damaged by accident. It was sliced clean, like with a blade. Parker was the first to examine it. When he saw the cut, his face drained of color. Not confusion, recognition. He plugged it in again. He found a file he had avoided for years. A file labeled "Do Not Watch, 4:13 a.m." He opened it. It showed Parker on his knees, brushing dirt off a metallic edge, a massive object with smooth, straight lines, too perfect for nature. It reflected light, even after years underground. Parker stared at it with wide eyes and whispered, shaking, "This isn't from our century." Chris paused the frame. Parker's hand hovered above the metal, fear written all over his face. "This," Chris said softly, "is why he hid it." Chris stared at the frozen frame on the laptop screen for a long moment. The room around him stayed completely silent. Everyone who sat with him could feel that something in the air had changed. This was not just some forgotten clip or a deleted moment from a mining show. This was something that had the power to shake a person from the inside. The look on Parker's face in the footage said everything. He was scared, truly scared. And Parker was not a man who scared easily. Chris leaned back in his chair and slowly closed the laptop. His fingers pressed together, and he took a deep breath before speaking again. He said that when he first saw that clip years ago, he felt his stomach drop. He knew right away that this was not a piece of metal from old mining equipment. This was not a tool. This was not a machine part. The lines were too clean, too sharp, and too straight. The shape was too exact, almost like it had been shaped with precision tools, far beyond anything they used. It didn't matter how long it had been buried underground. It didn't matter how deep it was. It still looked new, untouched. But what bothered Chris more than the object was the look in Parker's eyes as he uncovered it. He looked like a man realizing he had found something he wished he never touched, something that had no place being there, something that belonged to another time or another world. After showing the frozen frame, Chris continued explaining what happened after that night. He said that the days following the discovery were the strangest days he had ever lived on a gold claim. Parker changed completely. He was not the same young miner who joked around with the crew, teased his friends, and worked with intense focus. Now he moved like someone with a heavy secret on his shoulders. He avoided the ridge completely, except for times when he went there alone before sunrise. He checked the area like he expected something to come out of the ground. The crew noticed the change too. They whispered among themselves, but never dared to ask Parker anything. The mood on the claim felt wrong, like a weight had settled over the entire place. Even the ground felt different under their boots. Every rumble from the trucks felt louder. Every shift in the dirt felt sharper. Every shadow seemed to move differently around the ridge. One afternoon, Chris and a few crew members were working near the lower cut when they heard a loud beep from one of the dozers parked near the ridge. At first, they thought someone left the ignition on, but when they got closer, the lights on the dozers started flickering, bright, dim, bright again. Then suddenly, they flashed in a violent strobe, lighting the ridge like lightning. The sound of the engine coughing and revving on its own filled the air. No one was inside. No one was touching it. Chris said machines don't behave like that, not on their own, not unless something is very wrong. When the crew rushed to examine the machine, they expected a blown hose or old wiring. Instead, they found the hydraulic line sliced completely, clean and straight. It looked like it was cut with something sharp, something precise. Definitely not an accident. Definitely not something caused by normal wear and tear. Parker sprinted toward the machine when he saw the crew gathering. He examined the cut without saying a word. His expression shifted from shock to something deeper, something like recognition. When he whispered, "Not again," Chris felt a cold shiver run down his back. Those words meant Parker had seen something like this before, and if he had seen it before, it meant this was not the first time something strange had happened on his claims. Chris didn't push him for answers. No one did. They could tell Parker didn't want to talk about it. He didn't want questions. He wanted the ridge left alone. He wanted the secret buried under the ground to stay buried. But the strangest moment came the following night. The standby camera, still in the same place Chris had originally left it, captured something that none of them could understand. The figure that walked near the ridge returned. Chris described the figure in detail. It was tall, too tall to be anyone on the crew. Its shoulders were broad. Its movements were smooth and controlled. The reflective boots were unlike any work boots they had. They looked tactical, high quality, almost military. But the figure did not look like any soldier or worker they knew. The posture was strange. The steps were too silent, too steady. When Parker saw the figure from across the site, he didn't hesitate. He didn't grab a tool. He didn't call for help. He sprinted toward the figure, like he knew exactly who or what it was. His voice echoed across the ridge, sharp and panicked. The figure didn't run, didn't hide. It simply stood there until the camera lost focus. The audio cut off. The next frame showed Parker walking back alone, breathing like he had run miles. His jaw was clenched tightly. His hands trembled slightly. When the crew gathered the next morning, confused and concerned, Parker didn't explain anything. He simply said, "Nobody saw anything." His voice was cold, firm. It wasn't a suggestion, it was an order. Chris said that from that moment on, the crew stopped asking questions. They were scared too, not because of Parker, but because they didn't know what they were dealing with. Every person on that site felt the shift. The claim no longer felt like a place where they dug for gold. It felt like a place hiding a secret none of them wanted to uncover. A few days later, Chris discovered something that made everything even stranger. He found notebooks in Parker's bunk that he had never seen before. These were not normal planning notes. They were filled with symbols, sketches of the ridge, diagrams of the strange reading on the detector, and drawings of the metallic object underground. Parker had drawn the same geometric symbol he carved into the rock shelf. He sketched it again and again, almost like he was trying to understand it or decode it. But Chris said what frightened him most was the look of fear in the handwriting, the shaky lines, the pressure on the page, the rushed sketches. Parker was not exploring a mystery, he was running from it, trying to make sense of something he didn't want to accept. Even stranger, Parker stopped sharing any information with the crew. He shut down scans, he deleted video files, he avoided the ridge completely during the day. He
He ordered editors to cut any footage where the ridge appeared in the background. He erased drone footage that showed the area from above. He told the crew to stay far away from that section of land. No explanations, no details, just strict orders. Chris still didn't understand everything. He didn't know what Parker had seen. He didn't know who the figure was. He didn't know where the metallic object came from. But he knew one thing for sure. Parker was terrified of whatever they found on that ridge. He said the moment that broke him came when he saw the clip titled, "Do Not Watch," 4:13 a.m. It showed Parker digging around the metallic edge with his bare hands, brushing the dirt away like he wanted answers, but feared them at the same time. When Parker whispered, "This isn't from our century," Chris felt his entire world shift. It wasn't a joke. It wasn't exaggeration. It was fear, pure and real. The next morning, Parker sat alone on the tailgate of his truck. His shoulders slumped. His face looked empty, like he had experienced
something no miner was prepared for. His hands shook as he stared at the ground. In a weak voice, he said, "If this gets out, they'll shut us down." Chris asked him, "Who's they?" Parker didn't answer. He didn't even look up. He just whispered again, "Some things are better left buried." Chris looked up after telling this part and said he never forgot those words. They stayed in his mind for years. Now, after finally showing the footage, Chris said he believed people deserved to know what happened. They deserved to know what was hidden and what Parker fought to keep buried. Chris ended by saying this was only the beginning. There was more footage, more moments, more secrets hidden on that SD card, and he was finally ready to reveal them. Chris stared at the frozen frame on the laptop screen for a long moment, and the silence in the room grew so heavy it felt like a physical weight pressing down on everyone present. This wasn't just forgotten footage or some deleted moment from a mining show. This clip carried something darker, something that touched a place inside a person that reason couldn't reach. In the frame, Parker Schnabel's face said everything. Pure fear, a raw, unfiltered terror that didn't belong on the face of a man who rarely flinched at danger. Chris slowly closed the laptop and leaned back, pressing his fingers together as he took a deep breath, and explained that when he first saw that clip years ago, his stomach dropped. He knew instantly that the object Parker uncovered wasn't a tool, wasn't a piece of mining equipment, wasn't anything man-made by the people who worked that ground. The lines were too sharp, the angles too precise, the shape too perfect, like it had been engineered using technology far beyond anything they used or even understood. It didn't matter how long it had been buried or how deep it was. It still looked new, untouched, as if time itself couldn't age it. But what haunted Chris more than the object was the look in Parker's eyes as he brushed the dirt away, the expression of a man realizing he had found something he wished he never touched, something that wasn't supposed to be there, something that felt like it belonged to another world entirely. After that night, Parker changed. He wasn't the same determined, joking, driven young miner the crew had always known. He moved like someone carrying a secret that was too heavy to speak aloud. He avoided the ridge entirely, except for the times when he went there alone before sunrise, checking the ground like he expected something to crawl out of it. The entire claim felt different after the discovery. Even the dirt felt heavier under their boots. Every rumble from the truck sounded sharper. Every shadow near the ridge seemed to stretch too far. And then, one afternoon, Chris and a few crew members heard a loud beep from a dozer parked near the ridge. Thinking someone left the ignition on, they walked toward it, only to watch the machine's lights flicker, bright, dim, bright again, before suddenly strobing violently like lightning flashing across the ground. The engine coughed, revved, and roared all on its own. No one was inside. No one touched it. Machines don't do that, not unless something is seriously wrong. When they examined the machine, expecting a blown hydraulic hose or worn wiring, they instead found the hydraulic line sliced clean through, cut with a precision that no accident could create. When Parker saw it, he sprinted over, examined the cut, and whispered two chilling words, "Not again." That was when Chris felt the cold truth sink into his bones. Parker had seen something like this before, and if he had, then this wasn't the first time something unexplainable had happened on his claims. No one asked questions after that. They could tell Parker didn't want to talk, and they didn't want to know more than they already did. But the strangest moment came the following night, when the still-running standby camera captured something none of them were prepared for. The figure returned. Tall, too tall to be anyone on the crew, broad, shouldered, moving with a smoothness that was unnatural. Its reflective boots were unlike any work boots the miners used, more tactical, almost military. But the posture, the stride, the silence didn't match any soldier. When Parker saw the figure from across the site, he didn't freeze or call for help. He sprinted toward it like he knew exactly what it was. His voice echoed across the ridge, sharp and desperate, but the figure didn't run or react. It simply stood there until the camera lost focus and the audio cut out. The next frame showed Parker walking back alone, breathing hard, jaw clenched, hands trembling. The next morning, when the crew gathered with confusion and fear, Parker looked at them with a cold expression and said, "Nobody saw anything." Not a suggestion, an order. And from that moment on, the crew stayed silent. Days later, Chris found something in Parker's bunk that made the entire mystery even darker. Notebooks filled with symbols, sketches of the ridge, diagrams of the strange readings from the detector, and detailed drawings of the metallic object. Parker had drawn the same geometric symbol he carved into the rock shelf, repeating it page after page, as if he was trying to solve it or decode it. But what frightened Chris most wasn't the content, it was the handwriting. Shaky, heavy, panicked. Parker wasn't studying a mystery, he was running from it, trying to understand something he didn't want to believe was real. He started deleting footage, erasing drone shots, shutting down scans, and forbidding the crew from going near the ridge. No explanations, only the same cold silence. Chris said the moment that broke him came when he watched a clip labeled "Do Not Watch, 4:13 a.m." In it, Parker dug around the metallic edge with his bare hands, brushing dirt away with desperation and fear tangled together. Then he whispered, "This isn't from our century," and Chris felt his entire world tilt. The next morning, Parker sat alone on the tailgate of his truck, shoulders slumped, eyes empty, hands trembling as he stared at the ground. "If this gets out, they'll shut us down," he said in a weak voice. When Chris asked, "Who's they?" Parker didn't answer. He only whispered, "Some things are better left buried." Those words stayed with Chris for years, haunting him long after the season ended. And now, after revealing the footage he promised never to show, he said this was only the beginning, that the SD card contained more clips, more moments, and more secrets than anyone could have imagined, and he was finally ready to reveal all of them. Chris said that after he revealed the first set of clips, he didn't sleep for 2 nights, not because he was scared of what he had seen before, but because he knew that the next files on the SD card were far worse. The folder labeled Archive B had always bothered him. He never understood why Parker kept it separate, hidden behind password protection, buried deep within nested folders, as if he didn't even want the computer to stumble onto it by accident. When Chris finally opened it, the first thing he noticed was that the timestamps didn't match anything from the crew's schedule. These weren't videos captured by the production team or the regular miners. These were recordings Parker made alone, late at night, sometimes past 3 or 4 a.m., hours when the entire claim was asleep and nothing should have been moving. The earliest clip showed Parker standing on the ridge, pointing a spotlight at the ground. His breath came out in heavy clouds, even though the temperature wasn't cold enough for that. His voice shook as he whispered, "It's deeper than I thought." Chris didn't understand what Parker meant at first, but the second clip made it horrifyingly clear. The camera zoomed into the dirt where the metallic edge had first been found. It wasn't a small object buried in the earth. It was the corner of something much larger, much deeper, and the metallic surface went down far beyond the reach of their tools. It wasn't buried by accident. It looked like it had been resting there for a long, long time. The third clip was shakier. Parker's hands trembled as he filmed a set of unusual grooves etched into the metal, grooves that formed shapes and symbols he had copied in his notebooks. The camera struggled to focus, as if some electromagnetic field interfered with the lens. When Parker's voice came through, it cracked with fear. "It reacts to sound," he whispered. "It reacts when I speak." Chris paused at this point and said he remembered watching the playback and feeling the hairs on his arms rise, because while Parker whispered into the camera, the metallic surface pulsed faintly, light rippling across the lines like a heartbeat responding to his voice. Machines and metal don't behave like that, not naturally, not without power. And yet, there it was, something buried beneath their claim that shouldn't have had any power at all, glowing faintly in the dark like it was listening.